So between the Redmi Note 10, the Redmi Note 10 Pro and the Redmi Note 10 Max, there are differences, but there are not a lot of differences between the Redmi Note 10 Pro and the Note 10 Pro Max. Which one should you pick? We're going to be reviewing the Redmi Note 10 Pro and the Max in this video, so let's quickly get started. So if you're interested in checking out the Redmi Note 10, we've already done a review for the Redmi Note 10. You should go to our channel youtube.com/iGyaan and check out that video. If you're there, don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you're not already a part of the channel. Let's continue with the Redmi Note 10 Pro and the Max. So the major difference between the Redmi Note 10 Pro and the Note 10 Pro Max is the difference of the camera. So one has a 64 megapixel camera on the back as the main camera, while the other has a 108 megapixel sensor. So whether you want the 108 megapixel sensor is going to dictate whether or not you're willing to spend 3,000 extra for the phone. And for the most part, before we get started with the video, between the two devices, I feel that you should pick the Redmi Note 10 Pro and not the Note 10 Pro Max, because the 108 megapixel is not really going to be useful for most cases. With that being said, let's get started with the review for this device. And we'll start off with build quality and design. So while the language of design is pretty similar to what we saw with the Redmi Note 10, you do get a few differences with respect to build quality and the design. So with the Redmi Note 10 Pro or the Note 10 Pro Max, you do get a Gorilla Glass 5 on the front of the display, whereas with the Note 10 you do get Gorilla Glass 3. On the back as well, you do get a glass back versus a glass stick back that you get on the Redmi Note 10. And this glass is not made by Corning and it's not a Gorilla Glass, but like we said, Xiaomi claims that this is a good quality glass comparable to Gorilla Glass. They refuse to tell us who the vendor is. So it could be anybody. It could be Asahi or one of those manufacturers, or it could just be a local manufacturer, because most of these components are being sourced from India. So this could be a Indian sourced glass, but they claim that it's as tough as Gorilla Glass. It does allow them to save some money if they don't use the Gorilla Glass branding on the back. So maybe it's a price related thing. The phone also has really nice color options. So you do have a white as well as this black. It's called the Dark Knight. And then you also have this color, which I really like because it does have a matte finish to it. It's called the Vintage Bronze. And this is one of the nicest colors that you can get. If you're looking for these phones, I would personally pick the Vintage Bronze. Also because I feel that it's slightly different from your typical black or white. This looks quite cool, but it's not for everyone. It's got a slightly gaudy tone to it. So it's not for everyone, but for certain people, this will be a really nice color. Definitely recommended. The phone also has IP53 certification, so it's splash resistant. If you end up dropping it in a puddle or something, you want to take it out, dry it off, turn off the phone perhaps, and leave it for a while. Do not charge it, and it should survive. But it's for most splashes or basic rain or whatever, the phone is resilient to that. It does have coatings appropriately, and it is also dust resistant. So it's a pretty durable phone from that aspect. It's built well, and you do get a case inside the box. So from a construction perspective and from a safety perspective, you have mostly everything covered. So let's now move on to the display. Highlight of this phone, 120 Hz, 6.67 inch Super AMOLED display. So we do have a 1200 nits of peak brightness. HDR10 is natively supported. You can watch HDR content on Netflix, on YouTube, or whatever. And 1200 nits of peak brightness is pretty impressive. The display in itself is also well tuned, and you do have lots of options in the display settings. So if you want to change around the color balance or whatever, you can do that from the display settings. And it works really well in the dark mode as well. If you're somebody who likes to keep their phone on dark mode at all times, this works great for that. You have deep levels of black, good color saturation, and good viewing angles, and the fact that it's a 120 Hz display is great as well. Now with the 120 Hz display, it's very important to point out that this is not a variable refresh rate display, and for the most cases, you want to keep this display at 60 Hz because most content and most games will only support 60 Hz of refresh, and the display does not automatically scale down. And if you're playing games that only support 60 Hz of refresh, this display will look jittery and the game will look jittery, and you might think that your phone is not performing well, but it's actually the display that's not performing well. And because of the way the display is designed, you want to keep your device at 60 Hz unless you know the content or the game that you're playing is at 120 Hz. Because then you will get the 120 Hz refresh rate experience. What the variable refresh rate also means that if you're watching content that's 24p or any other refresh rate, it will not look really nice on this display, and that is a big downside. Xiaomi says that because this is not an LCD display, they can't give that variable refresh rate capability to an AMOLED display, or if they do choose to use that display driver, it will really bump up the cost. So you do trade in quite a lot for getting the AMOLED display, and it'll be a hit or a miss for a lot of people. Also, AMOLED screens are really expensive, so if you do end up damaging the screen, the cost of replacing it will be probably much higher than it would be for an LCD display. So all of these things in mind, it's still a pretty fantastic display, and the fact that they've made an AMOLED display available in this price bracket in general is pretty impressive. It's a good AMOLED display. It's got 120 Hz, and more importantly, it's got 1200 nits of brightness, so you're getting a pretty good package here. From a performance perspective, on the inside is a 732G chip, and it's an octa-core CPU with the Adreno 618 GPU, and you get an option of 6 GB or 8 GB of RAM, and then you also do get a option of what storage you want to get based on what you're willing to pay for it. So for 15,999, you get 6 GB of RAM with 64 GB of storage. If you want 128 GB of storage, you pay 1,000 rupees more at 16,999. And then if you want 8 GB of RAM and 128 GB of storage, you pay another 2,000 more. So it's 18,999 for the highest variant. And then you also do have micro SD card expandability. It is a dedicated slot, so you can add in your micro SD card. So if you don't want a lot of storage and you're okay with the 6 GB of RAM, then I would pick the 64 GB variant, and that should suffice for most people. Now, performance is pretty good day-to-day activities, and it does manage to handle the 120 Hz display really well. We don't see a lot of lag in the user interface, and it switches between applications quite well. Performance from a daily perspective is pretty impressive from the device. Now, this phone also lacks any kind of 5G capability. If you're somebody who's wanting to buy a 5G phone today, this phone will not have that. You do have other options that do offer 5G, but they do cross the 20,000 rupee price bracket. This phone remains mostly under the 20,000 rupee price, so you don't get 5G capabilities. But I'm sure there's a new phone from the brand somewhere around the corner that will give you 5G capabilities. So if you're looking for 5G on your phone for some reason, you may want to hold out. If you're gaming on this phone, you do get pretty impressive results, but like I said, you want to manage your refresh rate yourself, and then you also want to manage your expectations, because the 732G is a good chip, but it's not great as far as benchmarks or performance is concerned. But for the price that you're paying for this device, you're getting pretty impressive performance numbers, and you get around a 3 lakh on Antutu and similar results as far as a Geekbench or any other benchmark is concerned. And from a gaming perspective as well, you get decent performance. You can't expect to get the highest level of graphics on most games, but you will get medium to high graphics as far as gaming is concerned. Now, battery life, a 5020 mAh battery, 33 watts of fast charging is supported. A charger is included inside the box, which does do 33 watts. And if you watched my Redmi Note 10 video, you know that I talked about the cable. The cable is a high quality cable, and hopefully Xiaomi will sell this separately. And if they do, then this will be a good USB-C cable to recommend to somebody or have as a second cable as well. 33 watts of fast charging is good enough for the device. 5000 mAh battery gives us about 6 to 7 hours of screen on time for average mix use. If you're doing hardcore gaming, it'll be about 2 hours less. If you're doing less gaming and less internet usage, you will get about an hour or 2 hours more. And then the phone for typical users will last about 2 days without requiring a recharge. And that's a good mix of battery life. And like I said, 33 watts is good enough to quickly charge your phone to top it up as well. So if you want to top up your phone every night, you can do that as well. So the major difference between the Redmi Note 10 Pro and the Note 10 Pro Max is the camera. And while the Redmi Note 10 Pro gets a 64 megapixel Samsung GW3 sensor, it's an ISO sensor. The Redmi Note 10 Pro Max gets the 108 megapixel Samsung HM2 sensor. And the benefit of the 108 megapixel sensor is also the fact that you do get 3 times of lossless zoom. So you do get that telephoto capability within the main sensor. This is of course super sampling the image to get you a higher megapixel. Actually, it's pixel binning to get you a higher megapixel shot. And in most cases, you will not be capturing images on the 108 megapixel or even the 64 megapixel of either of the phones. So for the most part, you're getting a pretty good auto camera from both the devices, and that does deliver in both the cases. So if you're not looking for that 3x lossless zoom and a 108 megapixel number for your image, the Redmi Note 10 Pro will mostly suffice for all people, and the video capability as well as the image capability, apart from basic differences, remains mostly the same. So if you're looking at the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max, you're getting a 12 megapixel sensor, which is sort of multiplied 9 times to give you the 108 megapixel shot. So in most auto situations, you will get a 12 megapixel image, and that's what you will be capturing for most cases for putting on social media, for sharing with your friends. You'll use a 12 megapixel shot. What's good to know is that if you're clicking multiple 108 megapixel images, the processor is quite capable of handling that, and you do get quick shutter times between images, and it's a pretty responsive chip for that. The image processing on the 732G restricts video at 4K 30 FPS. That's what we are getting from both the devices, whether you choose the Max or the regular. Whereas the sensor on the Max does support up to 4K 120 FPS. So the only bottleneck as far as the camera sensor is concerned for the Max remains to be the 732G chip. So if you wanted better image capabilities from the sensor and really wanted to push the HM2 to its limits, the disadvantage is that the 732G cannot provide that performance or that capability. So what you're losing out is on that. Apart from that, image stabilization is built into both the sensors, and you have gyro-based image stabilization, and you get a pretty good output from that as far as images are concerned. If you have shaky hands, images still tend to be sharp and in focus, and if you are capturing video as well, you'll get some sort of digital image stabilization, which looks good. Colors are really nice, saturation is on point, and you also get good focusing capabilities on the cameras, so all of that is good as well. You also get a combi sensor for the macro as well as the telephoto, so you get a 5 megapixel camera for that. And then you also get an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, which does have a 118 degree field of view, a 2 megapixel depth sensor. Good combination of camera sensors. The 2x telephoto being a 5 megapixel is quite a disappointment. So if you're looking at the 108 megapixel sensor, that will come in handy for the 3x lossless zoom that you can get on that. That will be handy for a lot of people. With the 64 megapixel sensor, you're looking at a 5 megapixel telephoto or some sort of digital zoom in there as well. So not a very good telephoto sensor in both cases, but you do have a pretty good ultra-wide camera, and the results from that are pretty impressive. And in both cases, you do have a pretty good front-facing camera with a good amount of depth management. If you're doing portrait shots, you get good results. And then the app within the phone allows you to customize your images quite a lot, so you can play around with that. The phone does support carrier aggregation, and that works well, and you can pop into SIM cards because there is a dedicated tray in there as well. The Redmi Note 10 Pro and the Redmi Note 10 Pro Max vary in price quite a lot by about 3,000 rupees, and the only real advantage of going for the Max model is the 108 megapixel sensor. And for most people, for 99% of the people watching this video, and for 99% of the people wanting to buy this phone, the 108 megapixel sensor camera will never be used. So I would recommend that you pick the 64 megapixel camera variant, which is the Redmi Note 10 Pro. Save yourself 3,000 rupees. And if you're really interested in getting more zoom or lossless zoom, you can invest in a good telephoto lens, which will cost you about the same amount of money, and you can keep the lens for later on, use it with other phones as well. For the performance aspect, you're getting similar results. For benchmarks and everything else, you're getting the same results, because essentially they're the same phones, and the displays on these phones are also pretty impressive. Build quality is nice. It's a pretty good package from Xiaomi. What we're missing out is the user experience from the interface. You still get MIUI, you still get a bunch of apps that you don't want or cannot control, so security and get apps is something that I don't really want on the device. But the fact that they allow you to delete almost everything else is pretty good. They're moving in the right direction, not completely there yet. And with the progress that they're making in this department, you're getting a pretty good package for the amount of money that you pay. And the only real downside is that if you're buying a phone today and want to use it for the next couple of years, at least 2-3 years, then 5G will be something that you will really miss out on, especially if plans for rollout of 5G by the end of this year do surface and do happen. Then this phone will be left behind, and that will be a problem for somebody who's investing in a phone today for the next couple of years. But if you're looking for a phone for the next couple of months, the Redmi Note 10 Pro will be the good phone to pick, especially because of the display. especially because of some of the capabilities that it has. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash the like button. If you haven't already, make sure to hit the subscribe button along with the bell notification icon with all notifications turned on. My name is Bharat. Go check me out on Instagram as well as Twitter. I'll see you guys in the next one.